My name is Maria and I'm a grateful believer celebrating victory over codependency and anxiety. I am the happily married mother of two extraordinary little ones, and I work as a UX designer at Microsoft. I grew up in Spain thinking I was raised by a near-perfect Catholic family and turned out pretty darn good myself. Later in life, I moved to the United States and eventually married my husband, and from the outside, we led a fairly successful life. With the ups and downs that I thought every passionate couple ought to have. And if my husband had some struggles, that was normal, right? About 4 years into our marriage, everything fell apart and we separated. And in my very loneliest, scariest time in my life, a good friend recommended Celebrate Recovery. A few days later, I walked into a CR to learn how to fix my husband. It was the only way I would ever step a foot into a CR. I would have never in a million years thought I was broken, needing to be healed. I wasn't the one with problems, my husband was. I had been silently judgmental and I thought of myself better than those people. And as a deep dive into CR, I started really seeing myself with completely different eyes. I realized that I was broken and that the women I met in CR were the most beautiful I had ever seen. As people shared the stories with me, I started becoming real and vulnerable for the first time in my life. True forever friendships were found in these groups where I felt loved, at home, and I could feel the presence of God. As I saw God first, God started healing me. He changed my heart, my life, and healed my marriage, teaching us how to live together with faith, love, and respect. These days I am honored to lead a small group at CR where I get to share my story with others, seeking healing by humbling themselves through confessing to each other and God. To witness the miracles God works in recovery is the best reward there is, and I am incredibly grateful for what CR has done in my life.
I also want to welcome everyone that's watching from all of our campuses. It's good to be back. And I am here to start off a series that we are calling Overcomer. I'm going to do something that I don't normally do, but I'm going to bury the lead right now. And the lead is, today I'm talking about overcoming stress and anxiety. And I'm actually going to tell you up front how I believe you do it. Now, when I first committed my life to Christ, there's those verses that you have to memorize. They tell you to memorize John 3:16, and one of the other staple verses that you need to memorize. So if you don't have these verses memorized, it's assignment number 1 for you this week. But one of the verses that you should memorize is Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. And it's really familiar. You've heard it dozens of times. And it's this great reminder that says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. So let me just first off say, if you want to overcome stress and anxiety in your life, you have to constantly remind yourself of that verse. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. Then I also think there is another really important verse that you need to remember. And it's Psalms 37, verse 25. And this is one of those verses that usually should get people to shout you down after you say it. It's like a surefire amen preacher verse. And if I say it the right way with the right southern twang, you'll really get into it. So you ready? Here it comes. So it's this. So you got to respond right. I have never seen the righteous forsaken, or the seed begging bread. Come on, Brandon. That's good. You know what's interesting about that verse, and I want to highlight it really quick. David said it. It's part of the Psalm 37 that David wrote. He said in the very beginning of it, he said, I was once young, but now I'm old. So he's reflecting back on his entire life. And he says, I've never seen the righteous forsaken or the seed begging bread. I want to mention one thing, that is not a promise in the Bible. Okay, David is not saying, God promised you this. David is saying, This is my observation of what I've seen throughout my life, that I've never seen the righteous forsaken or the seed begging bread. And let me tell you what my conclusion of those two verses is, and then I want us to pray together. That if you want to overcome stress and anxiety in your life, and I don't know who that applies to, it might only be a handful of you. This is the illustration that I have for you, is this. And I think what these verses mean is you hold on to Jesus like this. And you hold on to everything else like this. You hold on to Jesus like this. And everything else like this. I want you to bow your heads, close your eyes. I want everyone across all of our campuses to repeat this prayer after me. Everybody say, Dear Jesus, speak to my heart, change my life. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I want to tell you my 6-month journey. This is actually, this weekend, is the year anniversary of what I believe was the most difficult yet courageous decision that we've made in the history of Canyon Creek. And by the way, there has been a number of them. But this was the biggest one. It was the most risky. And what it really was, this was the weekend where I told our church that we were merging our two largest campuses. That we were going to merge our Everett campus and our Mill Creek campus together, and that we were going to sell our Everett building, and we were going to move to the Mill Creek building, double the number of services, eventually demo the Mill Creek building, and build a new building. This is the weekend that we shared that. Now, we had had a month and a half as a leadership team to wrestle through this decision. We prayed it through. We were convinced this is what God wanted for our church. But at the same time, we knew it was going to be a huge decision. And we readied ourselves for all of the potential end results of it, because we knew there would be collateral damage as a result of this. In fact, we took all fall to prepare the church, remodel this building, and prepare the church for this merger of these campuses. We called it a marriage. But in our best guesstimate, we figured as a result, we were probably going to lose 25% of the church as a result of this. Now, I didn't want to lose one person. Now, I want to tell you, as a pastor, every person that decides to transition or that moves out of state, it hurts because you love the people in your church. So if you ever wonder what that's like, for every person that leaves, there is a pastor that's heartbroken. Trust me, it always happens that way. We didn't want it to happen, but we knew as a result of this decision that if we were going to do something courageous, we had to take a step back to take a huge step forward. Fast forward to Easter of this past year. Christian and I would meet together, and we were stunned by what God was doing. Not only had we not lost anyone, percentage-wise, but the church had experienced the largest percentage growth that we'd experienced in the last 5 years. And it led, and not only did we have like numeric growth and amazing numbers of people getting saved and baptized, but our giving had exponentially increased. In fact, by Easter, our giving was up over 20% over the year before. All of this means nothing to you personally, but for me as a pastor who'd prepared myself for the utter worst, it was incredibly encouraging. And then Easter rolls around. I don't remember how many services. I think we did 13 services across all of our campuses, plus did that big, huge Easter outreach at Bob's Farm. And that weekend, we had the largest weekend in the history of our church. Across everything we did, we had 7,000 people here. Okay, I mean, this year started off epic. And then 2 weeks later. It was 2 weeks before I was going to lead our missions trip to Cuba. I had a Wednesday night off, which, by the way, was rare because I don't normally have a Wednesday night off, and I decided I'd sneak away and go to a movie. I like going to movies by myself. I mean, it's totally creepy and weird, I know, but I'm that guy. Primarily because I like sitting in the back of the theater and playing on my phone the entire time without my wife yelling at me. So that was what I was doing. But I was in the back of the theater playing on my phone, and halfway through the movie, I get a phone call from the lender who was lending us the money to do our building program. And I thought, well, that's strange because it was 8:30 our time and 10:30 at night their time. And I figured, well, surely they're only calling me to give me good news. And so I run out of the movie theater, I answer the phone, and I say, yeah, what's going on? And they said, Brandon, we are denying your loan. I was, in that moment, church, I was crushed. It was the least likely thing I had expected. I mean, we have every building and piece of property that we have bought risky. Over the first 13 years of our existence, they took a chance on us and did it. Now our church is a couple thousand people, several $1 million a year worth of giving, and they're denying it. It made absolutely no sense. But all I knew is that I had to fix this quickly. So I had to do something that I did not want to do, which is I had to turn over the leadership of the Cuba trip to my missions pastor, Flavius, and not go. Because I had to get away and fix this situation. Fortunately, I was able to get away, fix it, got approval. The missions trip was amazing for everyone. Immediately when Flavius was back into the office, our missions pastor, he came in and met with me, and he said, Brandon, I need to talk to you. And he said, I love my job at Canyon Creek. He said, this is my dream job. He said, but I need to talk to you not as my boss, but as my pastor. By the way, I've come to dread that statement. And he said, you know, my dad started a church 3 years ago. My dad's church is really struggling. In fact, it's kind of on life support. And he said, while I was in Cuba, he said, I was just moved over and over again. And he had just finished Pastor's Huddle with me. And everybody knows that one of my core values is that family matters most. And he said that core value of yours just kept echoing through my mind as I was in Cuba. And I was thinking about what my dad was going through. And he said, I feel like I need to go help my dad. And he said, so as not my boss, but as my pastor, what do you think I should do? What am I supposed to say? So I said, you know, Flavius, I would go help my dad because family matters. The next week, Christian came in and met with me. And he said, Brandon, you know that church Hillcrest that I turned the job down 2 times? I said, yeah. I had just heard that the person that they had hired, that it all fell through at the last second. So I wondered if they were going to come back to Christian. And he said, Hillcrest has come back and they've talked to me again. And he goes, this is strange, but I feel like I'm supposed to walk through this. And that was all he said. And he kind of left my office. And in that moment, I just paused and I just prayed. And I said, Lord, I'm going to trust you with all my heart and lean not on my own understanding. And all my ways acknowledge you and you'll make my path straight. And I felt like the Lord said this to me, as clear as I am talking to you. I felt like the Lord said, Brandon, this is my will for Christian. This is going to happen. I am promoting him. This is what I'm going to do for him. And I felt like the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, you need to ready your heart for this. So it was leading up to, he had his interview a month later. And in that entire month, Christian came at least twice a week to my office and said, don't replace me because I'm not going to do this. He said, I'm not going to leave right now when everything is going great at Canyon Creek. He said, we're finally going to see this building. We've been dreaming. He said, I'm not going to do this. And he knows the way I think. So he says, don't replace me. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, but I know what God said. So Christian goes, he does that interview, comes back and he meets with me. And he says, Brandon, I need to talk to you, not as my boss, but as my pastor. Hate that statement. And he said, for some reason, I feel like I'm supposed to pursue this opportunity. And that was the moment where I looked at Christian and I said, here's what the Lord spoke to me a month ago when you brought this up to me. And I shared it with him. And I was honest. I would say, Christian, I don't want you to go, but I really believe that this is God's will for you. And he hadn't been offered the job yet or anything, but he was still going through the process. But I felt like this was going to happen. So Christian and I, for the next couple weeks, evaluated when we would talk to the staff. And we'd finally decided that we were going to tell the staff right before I left for Tanzania. So I was leaving for Tanzania in 2 weeks for this Africa trip. And we just met with the lead team and shared with the lead team and the elders that Christian was likely going to transition. And that morning, On came and met with Christian and I and let Christian and I know, was after Mother's Day, and she said, Mother's Day was really emotional. I was dealing with the fact that I was estranged from my own personal family and how close I was and my daughters are and Riley is to his family, and Riley has a good job opportunity in Linden, and we feel like we need to move by Riley's family. So I'm giving my 2 weeks notice right now. The whole time I'm thinking, awesome! How is my staff going to respond to this? So in one staff meeting, the staff found out not only about Christian, but they also found out about On. That particular Monday night, Morgan and Nicole were hanging out at my house. In fact, they were there till like 10:30, just kind of goofing around, and we love spending time with them. They're my kids' youth pastors, and so we were having a good time. And they left, and my wife took one of my sons shopping, and it was just me and Judah in the house, and I was typing away on my computer, and all of a sudden, I got insanely lightheaded, very dizzy, and I lost my ability to speak. And some of you have heard me tell this story. So for about 25 minutes, I tried to get a sentence out of my mouth, but I couldn't speak. It was freaking me out. I was finally able to get out of my mouth, Judah, if I pass out, call 911. Judah thought I was kidding. He quickly realized something's the matter with Dad. And so he was really nervous, and about an hour later, it all kind of went away, and I was kind of back to normal, but it was kind of nerve-wracking. The next day, we had a long staff meeting day, and at about 3 o'clock, I was done with all my meetings with people, and I had gone into my office, and I started typing away on the computer again. And this time, I noticed that my right hand and arm had gone numb, and that the right side of my face felt like it had Novocaine in it. And so in that moment, I am thinking I am having a stroke. And so I walked over to my wife's office, and I kind of shared with my wife what was going on. And if you know anything about Di is like a really tough girl. And so Di's attitude whenever you don't feel well is rub some dirt on it. So I expected my wife to say rub some dirt on it, but instead she looked very concerned. She actually called a surgeon in our church and said, here's Brandon's symptoms. What do you think is wrong with him? And he said, take him to the emergency room. Now he's having a stroke. So we immediately went to the emergency room. I had every test imaginable. In fact, $5,000 later, thank you, Obamacare. It cost a lot of money for all these tests. I came back completely normal. And the best they could tell is that my body was reacting to all the stress that I have in my life. That I was having a massive anxiety test, that it was the equivalent of having a stroke, what my body was doing. They gave me some meds, told me to go home and meet with my main doctor, and on our way home, we swung by the church to get my car, only to find out my car had gotten smashed in the office parking lot while I was here. That was awesome. So that week, I had these anxiety flare-ups all week long. Finally came in and met with my doctor at the end of the week, and I'm supposed to be leaving for Tanzania in like 4 days, and I'm having feeling like I'm having a heart attack. And so I meet with my doctor, and my doctor gives me a series of more tests and has me take more tests, comes back in and meets with me, and he says this. He says, Brandon, I deal with guys like you all the time in this area. He said people that are like executives at Microsoft and executives at Amazon and Boeing and things. And he said, and to a person, this is what I say to them when they're having anxiety issues at the level you are right now. He said, I tell them it is time to change careers. He said, because your job is literally killing you. That the stress from your job, your body is finally telling you it cannot handle it anymore. Well, of all the things a pastor doesn't want to hear is that, because I can't do anything else. And he paused, and he's a Christian man, and I love him, and I know that he loves me, and he loves my family. And he looks at me, and he says, but I'm not going to tell that to you, and you're going to have to excuse some of the phrases that I use. I'm going to be a little bit unedited, but he honestly looked at me, and he goes, Brandon, you got to figure your crap out. He says, if not, this job's going to kill you. Can I be honest with you, church? I was humiliated by this meeting. Was embarrassed. I mean, thinking that stress and anxiety would overwhelm me. I mean, you know how ashamed I was? Can I tell you why? Because that happens to you people. That doesn't happen to me. In fact, I got people in our church that are on disability with anxiety, and I'm going to humbly apologize and repent to you. I just thought you didn't want to work. I didn't even think this was real. And now I am struggling to not feel like I'm having a heart attack, and I'm ashamed because I don't ever hear of pastors dealing with stuff like this. I mean, I didn't know people dealt with this. And so I was embarrassed and ashamed. You put every adjective there. It was humiliating. And I left for Tanzania with my son. I had a couple pills to take to help me deal with this. And I want to be honest, church, that while I was in Tanzania, I did a series of videos for you. And I haven't gone back and watched these videos, but I had so many people that have known me for years that said, I watched those videos of you in Tanzania. In fact, my wife just said this to me about a month ago. She said, you looked sick. You looked ill. You didn't look good. I had multiple ones of my board members telling me that. I was like, that's nice. Thank you. And I got to be honest. I think you hadn't noticed before. Because I probably was looking that way for a while. But it wasn't until you heard about everything that I had been going through that you noticed it on those videos. But the first 3 days I was in Tanzania with my son, I felt like I was having a heart attack the entire time. I mean, I thought I'd gotten misdiagnosed and I was literally going to have a heart attack. And I'm thinking, my poor son is going to have to deal with me being medevaced from Tanzania. But fortunately, about a week into that trip, everything kind of reset in my brain. I started feeling better. I thought, I can do this. I'm going to hold on to Jesus like this. And I'm going to hold on to everything else like this. Because it is the only thing I know what to do. Is to hold on to Jesus with everything I've got. Because I have never seen the righteous forsaken or the seed begging bread. And I'm going to hold on to everything else like this. Because in that moment, I knew I had no control over anything else. So I get back from Africa. The very first meeting I have is with Colton. Says, I need to talk to you. I was actually at a Starbucks study, and I invited him to come. Colton's my boy. And he says, Brandon, I need to talk to you, not as my boss, but as my pastor. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm tired of this. And he says, my dad's planting a church. He lost his worship guy. And Colton asked me this. I mean, it was the hardest question ever because I so wanted to lie when I answered it. But he said, He said, I love my job. I love being here. He said, literally, this is my dream job. He said, but I'm worried for my dad. He's 55. He's never led a church. And now he's going to plant a church. And Colton says, I need you to be honest with me. How would you answer this, Brandon? He said, do you think my dad has a better chance to succeed with me on his team or without me? And I wanted to say, oh, dude, if he has you, he'll fail. But I couldn't. And I knew what that looked like. I knew that in a couple months I was going to have to share with my church, and Di shared it last week, that our 4th staff member, totally unrelated, had resigned. And church, I got to be honest, it's the 50-foot elephant in the room. I know how this looks. Christians talk crap more than any other group of people that exist. They talk crap at other churches about other churches. You talk crap here. And so I knew 4 people that were key staff members resigning looks bad. Now, I know that when I meet with people and I explain it, and if you talk to each one of them individually, it all makes sense, but it still looks bad. And in spite of all of that, I am trying to figure out how to be healthy because I'm trying to not have a heart attack. I'm trying to hold on to Jesus like this. And everything else like this. And I got to be honest, church, I wasn't worried for me with the staff. And I'm not worried for me with the staff. I have friends that pastor churches all around America. The average staff pastor stays for a year and a half at a church. It's just part of the culture that we have now. It's not awesome. I don't like it. I wish they would stay forever, which is why when Morgan and Nicole have their 10-year anniversary next summer, we are hooking them up. Because we want to honor people that have been here for that long. But I say all that to say, I didn't hurt for me. Because I can understand. I mean, I was the staff member that left to plant a church. I was that guy at one time. My bosses weren't thrilled when I left. But I hurt for you. Honestly, the whole time, I hurt for the sheep in our church because I knew what this feels like for you. So there's a new guy in our church. His name's Gary, and you got to spend time with Gary. He's awesome. And I started meeting with Gary just because he was new to the church, and I wanted to get to know him. And so I started meeting with him for a couple Mondays mornings. And Gary was a church planner, had a church that struggled and didn't last. And so now Gary does life coaching, which I felt fairly ironic. And I kind of just shared everything that I was going through with Gary. And this is in July. And I said, Gary, I don't know what I should do. And he said this, it was honestly the best word of advice I've ever heard. He said, Brandon, he said, as a church planner, everything you do is a sprint. He said, you run in a race like it's a sprint. You're sprinting to that mountain. You're sprinting here. You're sprinting there. You're sprinting there. And he said, there's one constant that happens for a sprinter is that after every race, you're worn out. And he said, the issue for Canyon Creek now is it doesn't need a sprinter leading it. It needs a marathon runner because you are no longer a church plant. And so in that moment, he said, you have to figure out how to lead this church like a marathon runner, not a sprinter, or you're going to kill yourself. And so my goal was by the end of the summer that I had to reinvent the way I led, reinvent everything that I knew to do. And I felt like that illustration that Gary gave me was right on the money. That I was trying to lead a church that needed to be led like it was a marathon as if I was still a sprinter, and it was wearing me out. I couldn't wait for August. Christian and Di had their month study sabbatical in July, and I worked all of July, probably 12-hour days, because it was just crazy with building stuff, and it led to August, and I could not wait for August. Because I just want to spend some time with Jesus. And I wanted to get away, pray, be alone, not have to deal with anybody's problems, and I needed to figure myself out. So I just decided that I was going to get in my car and drive. And recently, I had bought a condo. It had been a goal for like 10 years. We bought a vacation condo in Las Vegas, and so I thought, I'm going to spend a month in Vegas. I know it sounds unrelaxing to you, but for me, it was amazing. So I hopped in my car Wednesday morning at 5 a.m., and I started driving. I'd gotten on that little Road Tripper app and was going to hit every single weird site along the way. Have you ever done that before? And I love driving, and I love road trips, and I have a Dodge Challenger, and it's super fun to drive, and I'm zipping down, and I made it to Ely, Nevada in the first day. I didn't even know there was an Ely, Nevada. It's about an hour south of Jackpot, Nevada, which that fits, but I didn't know there was a Jackpot either. So I stayed in Ely, Nevada, and that night I thought, what do I want to do? I'm about 5 hours from Vegas, but I could go this detoured route, and I could be there in 8, but the detoured route, I could go on the extraterrestrial highway. And I thought the extraterrestrial highway sounds like a blast. You get to go see all the sites where they claim they've seen aliens. You get your picture by the black mailbox. You get to see Area 51. You get to go to Rachel, Nevada, where it's got a sign that says, population, humans, 25, aliens, question mark. And I wanted my picture by all these sites. And on the way, I was going to make a stop at the Lunar Crater Monument. Okay, the Lunar Crater Monument looks killer. Look it up sometime. Not right now, but later. Basically, a meteor hit the Earth and left this huge crater in the Earth. And I had seen thousands of pictures from it, and I had charged up my GoPro, charged up my drone. I was going to fly it over this crater and get all these really killer pictures and do all of these completely mortifying to my kids' selfies in front of it and things like that. I was all ready to do this. So I left Ely, Nevada, and I drove 2 hours to the Lunar Crater Monument. When I got there, I had not seen another car for an hour. And I'm not exaggerating. I hadn't seen another car for an hour. And not only that, I lost cell reception about 45 minutes before. But my GPS on my car was still working. So I pulled up to the entrance to the Lunar Crater Monument, and it was off of the highway. And I noticed that this road was a gravel road. And so this was my, at 8 a.m. logic. I thought, it's a national monument. Thousands of people visit this on a monthly basis. Surely this is a safe road. And in a moment, I actually paused and thought, should I or shouldn't I? And I thought, I'm all the way here. Why not? Remember, I haven't seen anyone for an hour, and I am in the middle of nowhere. Okay, like every horror movie begins this way. So the beginning of this was a gravel road. And so I drove in my low-riding Challenger about 20 miles an hour down this gravel road. My GPS said I was now 4 miles in, and all of a sudden the road changed. It turned into sand. Like not normal sand, like ash type sand. And I paused right at the section that had turned into sand, and I thought, this doesn't look right. But it's a national monument. Surely people do this. And so I knew that I needed to drive a little bit faster because I have a rear-wheel drive car, and it's sand. And so now I'm going about 30 miles an hour through this sand area, and all I see is white sand. That's all that I see in front of me. About a mile into this, the strangest thing happened. All of a sudden, my car goes into a hole. Shoots out the other side, and I see rocks. And like rocks in Nevada are like jagged, like meteor rocks everywhere. And I see these jagged meteor rocks flying out everywhere, and my car kind of jerks and shakes and dies 5 miles off the freeway in the middle of nowhere. And then my car starts saying, power steering failure. And I'm like, this is not good. And what had happened was somebody had dug a hole, put big, huge, jagged rocks in that hole, and covered that hole with sand. Now, I don't know if it's a full-on hills that have eyes scenario. I don't know if this is the Hitcher scenario. I don't know what this is. All I know is I hadn't seen anyone for a couple hours. My power steering wouldn't work. So in that moment, I got out of my car, and I looked underneath my car. And church, I know nothing about cars. I just know that I like them. And I looked underneath, and I went, that doesn't look right. So the only thing I could think to do is get back to that main highway. So I shifted it into reverse, drove 5 miles an hour, 5.5 miles without power steering, out to the main highway, which, by the way, I hadn't seen a car on that highway now for a couple hours. And it was in that moment I realized this is just a terrible scenario. And church, when you put it in the context of everything I had gone through in the last 4 months, I was like, come on, devil, this is getting ridiculous. I mean, what are you trying to, you're literally trying to kill me. My wife had told me earlier that morning, she had said, if you do anything crazy, please text me before you do it. And I forgot to text her even. So as I'm sitting there thinking, I don't even know what to do. I'm going to die in the middle of the desert in Nevada. This is honestly what I did. I got out of my car. I got down on my hands and knees. Going over here because of the fan. Jesus, I got myself into this. But I have never seen the righteous forsaken or the seed begging bread. Amen. Jesus, rescue me. I am not exaggerating. That is exactly what I did. And I said, Lord, I claim. I'm not a name it, claim it preacher, but if it works, I'm going to do it. And so I'm like, I claim in Jesus' name, I am sleeping in a bed tonight. And then I got up, and I just thought, God's going to do an amazing thing, and I'm going to be using it as a sermon illustration. So I did what I always do, took a lot of pictures and videos. And there is a lot that happened over the next 4 or 5 hours. It started when I finally saw a car. And that car's driving down that highway. And this is, again, now we're 2 hours without a car. And I jumped in front of the car on the highway waving my arms. Seriously, they think they're in a horror movie. The people that were there, they live in state parks. They had just left a state park in Colorado and had put all their camping gear and everything they own in the back of their car and were moving to a state park in California. Hey, you take who you can get. And I told them my situation, and they very graciously, he had his wife go sit in my car, and he drove me 45 minutes away to get cell reception. I'm not going to tell you all the details of everything that happened for the sake of time. But I want to tell you that that night, as I stayed in Tonopah, Nevada, this is the only thing I could find to remind myself of Tonopah. I just sat there and I was like, Jesus, I don't understand, but I'm going to hold on to you like this. I'm going to hold on to everything else like this. Jesus, you're the only thing that I know won't leave me, won't forsake me, won't gossip about me, talk crap about me. The only one I know I can rely on and trust. You're my hope. You're my future. All the stress and anxiety that I'm dealing with, Lord, only thing I know to do is to hold on to you like this and everything else like this. And Lord, in this moment, I choose to trust in you with all my heart and lean not on my own understanding, but in all my ways acknowledge you, because you're going to make my path straight. I'd love to come back and say, hey, I had a month, it was totally relaxing, it was amazing, everything went great, the devil stopped picking on me, yada, yada, yada. I'd love to say that. I will say that the next week was amazing because my insurance company settled incredibly quick. In fact, they called me to tell me the good news, that it had been determined that there was no one at fault for my accident. By the way, my car got totaled. Okay, totaled my car. But it was no one's fault. They said it was an act of God. That was the determination by the insurance company. Within 3 days, they had completely settled the entire claim. And not only that, they settled for more than I thought I was going to get, plus said if you buy another car, part of our insurance, we will cover your tax and licensing on your new car. So I spent my first 3 days in Vegas looking for a car. I love car shopping. Bought a new car. 6 days later, wrecked that car. Holding on to Jesus like this and everything else like this. So your pastor's back. I'm alive without a car. So my car is currently in a shop in Las Vegas and not available to the end of the month. I don't know how many of you struggle with stress and anxiety. But here's what I found out over the last few months as I've dealt with my reality, is that a lot more people deal with this than I thought. But we don't talk about it. You know, because I'm a man's man, and you don't talk about stuff like that when you're a man. You know, I basically run a large corporation. You don't talk about stuff like that when you're a CEO. You just don't. But I've been surprised to find out that I'm not alone. And as we talk about being an overcomer, I want to tell you what you do to overcome stress and anxiety. It's really, really hard to do. And I call what happened to me in the last 6 months, preachers use this phrase, we call it eating your sermon. Where every time I've ever preached on holding on to Jesus, God made me live it out. So if you're here, like me, struggling with stress, struggling with anxiety, God brought me back to remind you, hold on to Him like this. Just grab a hold. Don't let go. And you got to force yourself to let go of everything else because you have no control over that. Hold on to Jesus like this and everything else like this. I want everybody to bow your heads, close your eyes.